Faced with a government they couldn't trust and who wouldn't protect them, a resilient group of Appalachians boldly declared their independence from the tyranny and created their own sovereign state where they were free to embrace liberty. This is the incredible true story of the fight to create America's 14th state, the lost state of Franklin. Our story begins in 1784. A new country, the United States, is born from the ashes of the Revolutionary War. The original 13 colonies were tired of being governed from the other side of the world and paying taxes to a government who didn't represent them, had won their independence from Great Britain, and were busy installing their own government. This new American government would be comprised of the same leaders who had led the United States to victory in the war, both the military leaders and the wealthy men who had helped finance it. It was a time of great opportunity, as all land east of the Mississippi River was ceded by Great Britain to this new nation, and 3 of the original 13 colonies, Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia, even extended their state boundaries all the way to the Mississippi River, in anticipation for eventually driving the Native Americans west and stealing the land from them. The boundaries of North Carolina, in particular, encompassed what would one day become Tennessee. Yet, the state capital was all the way on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean, in New Bern. But the reality was that nearly all of the people living in these 13 states actually lived on the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains. These rugged mountains were so formidable that there were only a few routes over them, and all those trails were controlled by the Native Americans. There were few white men who had successfully breached the mountain barrier and had set up forts in small villages on the western slopes. They were a hardy breed of men, known as the Over-Mountain Men. These men were the first white men to live on the western side of the Appalachians, and they had learned much from the natives about surviving in the wilderness and fighting tactics, which proved to be vital in the Battle of Kings Mountain during the Revolution. So you see, North Carolina was facing several problems. It claimed so much land that it was impossible to practically govern it all. News from its coastal capital took months to reach the people living on the western side of the Appalachians. And at the same time, North Carolina couldn't afford to send any military aid to help these mountain men fight the natives who were defending their homeland. With that in mind, politicians set out giving huge land grants to soldiers who had fought in the Revolution, helping to eventually fill the territory with loyalists and men willing to fight the government's battle for them to claim this new land. Yet, to their surprise, many of the soldiers were tired of fighting wars, and the prospect of moving into Native American territory with their families' lives at stake didn't appeal to many of these veterans. So they sold their land grants to companies. And furthermore, North Carolina politicians had another problem. They were flat broke. The war had left them penniless, and they owed the U.S. government vast amounts. So they created the Land Grab Act, opening up the vast area that would eventually become Tennessee to any person who was willing to pay $10 for 100 acres. And they sold nearly 4 million acres of this land in a mere 8 months. But wouldn't you know it, over 3 million of those acres were now owned by politicians and their business friends, and many times without any actual proof of payment. Apparently, if the state of North Carolina couldn't own all that land west of Appalachia, the politicians might as well get filthy rich off of it, right? Finally, by April of 1884, under pressure from Congress to pay off its debts, North Carolina ceded 29 million acres, all of its land that laid between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains, back to the federal government. However, once the U.S. government realized that they were now responsible for all the cost to fight those Cherokee Indians who still occupied the area, they soon changed their mind and decided they didn't want the responsibility. Suddenly, the Over-Mountain Men living on the western slopes of the Appalachians were without state or country. The same men who had fought so valiantly in the Battle of Kings Mountain were now abandoned by all 13 states and left to fend for themselves on the edge of the American frontier. Yet, these were no ordinary men. They were Appalachian, and soon the entire course of American history would be altered as these men in this area set out to become the 14th state in the United States. Show your support for the Appalachian Storyteller, and right now, every sticker ships for free. By August of 1884, nearly 100 Over-Mountain men met in what is now Jonesboro, Tennessee, and discussed the dire circumstances. They found themselves without any official status, protection, or judicial accommodations. In their minds, this left them especially vulnerable to Native American attacks. John Sevier was one of the men who attended this meeting. His leadership had proved vital during the Battle of Kings Mountain just a few years earlier, so he was very well respected by his peers. Before long, the men all agreed to officially claim the entire three-county area on the western slopes of the Appalachian Mountains as a new state. The custom in those days was to name a town or a county after a prominent politician, and during this era, no man was more respected than Benjamin Franklin. Thus, the new territory, comprising of modern-day East Tennessee, would be known as the state of Franklin. Sevier was named the first governor, and they quickly set up officers and a militia to protect the area, and even adopted a state constitution that reflected Appalachian values. It called for religious freedom. It allowed any man the right to vote, even if he didn't own property. And it forbade all lawyers, preachers, or doctors from holding political office. That last sentence makes me pause for just a moment. What a novel idea. All poor people have the right to vote, and rich people aren't allowed to be politicians. Well, with radical ideas like that, you better believe other states took immediate notice. When word of this new state got back to the other side of the mountains, to North Carolina, they conveniently forgot that they had willingly abandoned both the people and the land. After all, the last thing those politicians wanted was all that land that they now personally owned through the fraudulent land grab to be owned by another state. So, in an about-face, they officially changed their minds and reasserted that the land was once again part of North Carolina. They even continued to demand payment of taxes from the mountain folks. But those Appalachians just simply refused to pay and never sent a dime to them. The government of North Carolina wanted more than anything to send its militia over those mountains and extract payment in blood. But they knew that those mountain men had proven themselves time and time again that they were masters of warfare in those hills. Soon, word began to spread across Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia about this new state, with laws made to support and defend individual liberty. And by now, folks all around the South were already tiring of the control, the restrictions, and taxes of this new American government, which seemed to be purposely designed to make the rich richer. In their minds, this new master was much like the old master. So, in a massive migration that's barely noticed by the history books, nearly 15,000 families moved to the state of Franklin. All of a sudden, this state, founded by Appalachian mountain men, had grown to 8 counties, and they had even created their own currency. And their leader, John Sevier, proved to be equally skilled in both war and negotiations. Under his leadership, the state of Franklin fought several large battles with Cherokees along the Nolchucky, the Watauga Rivers, and the Devil's Fork Creek. By June of 1785, Sevier met with Cherokee leaders and negotiated the Treaty of Dumpling Creek, opening up those lands to even more white settlers. Heck, Even the state capital of Franklin was built on this new land in what is modern-day Greeneville, Tennessee. Now, you better believe that a state as radical as Franklin put the United States government on notice. With these mountain folks self-governing themselves and negotiating peace treaties with Native Americans, they certainly had to be stopped. The first blow came in mid-1785, when the official petition for Franklin to become the 14th state of the United States of America was officially voted on. Each of the 13 states had one vote, and a total of 9 votes was needed to admit Franklin into the Union. However, Franklin only received 7 of the 13 votes in its favor, with North Carolina pressuring its neighboring states to vote against Franklin. So at this point, the state of Franklin was denied entry into the United States. But that Appalachian spirit was alive and well. The mountaineers carried it in their own right, much like an independent nation. This further angered the wealthy politicians on the eastern side of the mountains, though. So the United States began engaging in a series of calculated moves to undermine Franklin's relationship with the natives. In November of 1785, the United States negotiated the Treaty of Hopewell with the Cherokees, which completely reversed the treaty that John Sevier and the state of Franklin had in place. It was one of the only instances of the United States government ever returning Native American land. This treaty returned all the land along the French Broad River back to the Cherokees. This meant that the state of Franklin's capital was now sitting squarely on Native American property, along with the thousands of white settlers who had settled this land. This was a cutthroat move by the United States, designed to weaken Sevier's army and morale, as now the state of Franklin and the Cherokees were engaged in constant battles over this contested land. Over the next couple of years, all outside governments refused to recognize any official court orders from Franklin, making it impossible for folks to buy or sell property or complete any legal paperwork. And by 1787, internal strife was rampant, and many Franklinites began lobbying for a return to statehood with North Carolina. Seeing this, North Carolina agreed to forgive any unpaid back taxes for those who would stop paying taxes to the state of Franklin. And in the ultimate move to show power, North Carolina placed their own tax collector in the state of Franklin, a man named John Tipton, who was a bitter rival of John Sevier's. Tipton immediately ordered a sheriff to seize Sevier's personal property as payment to North Carolina for unpaid taxes. Yet, Sevier responded by showing up on Tipton's doorstep with a 145-man militia, and a 2-day siege of Tipton's home ensued. North Carolina had had enough of John Sevier, and finally they arrested him for treason, and they were set to try him in Morganton, North Carolina. However, a heavily armed group of John Sevier's supporters showed up at the jailhouse steps, and that sheriff just so happened to fight alongside John Sevier in the Battle of Kings Mountain, and he wisely looked away as Sevier mounted his horse and was free again. Yet, despite all his efforts, the state of Franklin had collapsed and was now part of North Carolina again. Now, the irony of this story is that a year later, in 1789, John Sevier would receive a full pardon for pledging allegiance to the state of North Carolina. And what did North Carolina do? Well, they promptly surrendered all of its land from the Mississippi River to the Appalachians to the federal government again as payment for its debt from the Revolutionary War. 7 years later, in 1796, this same land would become the 16th state admitted into the United States. And who was the first governor of this new state, called Tennessee? Well, you guessed it, John Sevier. The only difference was at this time, the United States made sure that silly part of Franklin's Constitution that outlawed rich people from becoming politicians was thrown out. And perhaps, my friend, just perhaps, that single line right there is why they would never, ever allow Franklin to become a state. The Appalachian Storyteller would like to thank our members whose generous contributions make true stories like this one possible. If you'd like to help support the cost of research and video production, click the Join button below. Thank you for your support.